they largely try to differentiate between two forms of happiness. One is this kind of day-to-day contentment. You can kind of think about it as your base level of emotional well-being, right? That you have a peace of mind. And what I like to think of this as your equilibrium level of happiness based on your personality. And we differentiate that kind of general attitude and peace of mind from a different type of happiness, which can come from what we call life fulfillment, right? There is this broader satisfaction of knowing that you're having an impact, you are doing something that goes beyond yourself, you're living a meaningful life. And we're all familiar with the aphorism that money can't buy happiness, right? And it turns out that that's really only partly true, because when we do research on happiness with large cross sections of the population, what we find is that below a certain income level, it is difficult to live with a sense of well-being and day-to-day commitment, simply because the challenges of meeting your everyday needs are so overwhelming that it's difficult to feel that peace of mind. So said another way, if you're living in a state of deprivation and you have tremendous anxiety about whether you're going to be able to feed your family or pay your rent, it's really difficult to convince yourself that you're happy. Now, that level of income that moves you out of a deprived state and into a more equilibrium level of life is highly dependent upon the community in which you live. So, if you live in a cardboard box beside a railroad track in urban India, you may be perfectly happy, right? If you drive a taxi and have a couple of dollars at the end of every week. If you live in a suburb of Austin, it may take $100,000 a year in annual income to meet what would be considered your basic needs, that you're not living in a state of anxiety around your financial situation. When we look at this across the United States, most recent studies have said on average, at about $85,000 a year in household income, this is not personal income, but household income, on average in the United States, that is sufficient income to get you beyond the insecurity associated with your financial position and into a level where you could have peace of mind and emotional well-being. And so the idea that money can't buy you happiness only applies once you have reached that threshold where you're not dealing with financial insecurity and deprivation. And additional increments of income above that level are very unlikely to increase your level of day-to-day contentment. Does that make sense? Right? Once you're not worried about feeding your family and paying the rent, then you kind of are who you are, right? You're at a certain personality and equilibrium around your day-to-day contentment. And making more money is unlikely to change that aspect of your personality. So money can't buy you happiness unless you're really poor. But once you get out of poverty and into something that allows you to feel a little bit more security, then money is unlikely to make you any happier. Hey, does that make sense to y'all? Anybody have a comment on that theory of that level of income to achieve day-to-day contentment?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because it's really not, like, in the grand scheme of things, it's really not that much annual income, like, to do that. But I mean, basically your basic needs, so you're no longer like feeling on edge, like you said, or like feeling like you have to like defend yourself, that you have a home, that you have food, that you have all your basic needs. Then after that, like you said, you're not going to change much more if you go buy a bunch of different stuff. So, but in the grand scheme of things, it's really not that much money. I would think it would be a lot higher.
Yeah, and obviously it depends on the community in which you live. You know, $85,000 in San Francisco is not going to buy you much. You know, $85,000 in Manhattan is not going to buy you much. And, you know, the number in Wichita, Kansas may be $55,000 a year. You know, it just kind of depends on the norms and the cost of living where you are. But you know, what we're talking about is Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Once your basic needs have been met and you're building on the foundation of that pyramid and you're into psychological needs, that's when you start to get this declining marginal utility of income. You're just, once your basic needs have met, food, water, warmth, security, safety, you know, you are who you are. And so that's where that threshold comes in, where money is unlikely to buy you more happiness of that sort. Now, that's not to say that money can't buy you happiness. It just requires us to define happiness in a different way. And that would come from what the sociologists call life fulfillment. All right, so once your basic needs have been met, you know, you've hit that $85,000 or $100,000 of household income, you're kind of at your day-to-day commitment maximum. What might additional income actually provide you? What could you spend that money on?
Give it back to the community.
Yeah, so there's philanthropy. You know, that may give you tremendous satisfaction of having a more fulfilling life. What else?
Having like more children or like a bigger family.
Yep. Clearly would enable that.
Hobbies and stuff you enjoy.
Being experienced.
Yeah, so experiences. We can not only we can have those kids, we can take them cool places and you know, do cool things with them. Right, we can buy more education with more money. We can buy more leisure time with more money. And so it's not that money can't buy us happiness. It's that if I'm making $85,000 a year and I'm in this very content place with high emotional well-being, and all of a sudden I'm making $1 million a year, I probably am not any more well off from a contentment standpoint, but I do have the flexibility to buy things that provide me with a greater sense of satisfaction that I have, you know, lived a meaningful life. Okay. Now, of course, the challenge with this is that as people move up that income scale, they don't tend to spend money on things that provide them with fulfillment. So instead of philanthropy and education and experiences, what do we tend to spend that extra income on?
Going out, food, eating out, movies, I don't know, things like
Yeah,
that.
I mean, some of those are experiences that may be worth having. The challenge with this concept of money and its impact on happiness is that we find ourselves on a hamster wheel, or mountain climbing with endless peaks ahead of us, right? So instead of increasing our satisfaction of life, we buy crap that we don't need in some attempt to compare ourselves favorably to our peer group. And we tend to compare up instead of down. And the story that I tell is somebody always has a bigger boat. Doesn't matter, right? I mean, you can make a lot of money and buy yourself a really nice boat and feel really proud and satisfied until you pull up next to the dude that has a boat that's 3 times as big as yours. And so this is what we do to ourselves that actually stands in the way of our happiness, regardless of our income level. So the message here when it comes to happiness is money is, I'm never going to tell you not to strive for more. Striving is fine. I think that striving with a clear purpose is the goal. If you say, Bill, I'm going to make $1 million a year, come hell or high water, I'm not going to try to talk you out of that as a goal. But I would be much more comfortable with that goal if you were articulating to me a clear rationale for why that was important to you and what you intended to buy with that money. And maybe it's just the satisfaction of providing for your children. Maybe it's the satisfaction of being able to be a philanthropist, or maybe it's just a bigger boat. And if it's just a bigger boat, I'm not going to argue with that either. I'm just going to tell you that you have to remember that somebody always has a bigger one.
Sounds like the discontentment is self-inflicted, is what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, we want it all, and we, instead of comparing ourselves favorably to those that are less fortunate, we compare ourselves unfavorably to those that are more fortunate. And the goal here, when we talk about happiness and money, is not to convince ourselves that money's not important. It's to have emotional maturity about money. And it is very challenging because the prevailing culture is not particularly emotionally mature when it comes to money. And, I struggle with it myself. I've been very fortunate, extremely fortunate in the last year. I sold a business that, for life-changing money. And my general unease about my position is that I'm broke, and just doesn't change, right? I'm struggling with my own emotional maturity about money. I worry about it constantly when that makes no sense whatsoever. What we should be thinking about when it comes to our hierarchy of needs is, money gets us our basic needs, right? Food, water, shelter, security, safety. there's really nothing about these psychological needs or our self-fulfillment needs that necessarily require additional income, right? This is about our friend network. It's about the community in which we live. It's about the esteem that comes from the work that we do. These are things that are much more important to our assessment of life satisfaction than just going faster and faster on the hamster wheel. Right? Once you've passed those basic 2 levels in the hierarchy of needs, you've moved beyond the point where money is really important to your self-fulfillment. Any other thoughts on that?
Well, what I'm thinking is, okay, if let's say it's if we just focus on money all the way through, the issue is when we turn 40, we turn into like this crisis moment where we realize we just as you said, we just went with the wheel and just work without fulfilling ourselves. And then after we try to catch back the time, but the time is already gone. So we try to compensate, buy a Porsche or buy a big boat and things like that, but it never works. So it's always good to be able to kind of manage money and as well yourself and experiences and things like that, and trying to do it all the way through.
Well, I think you're right, Thibaut, and that's a good way of framing it. Is, you know, the ultimate horror, like the ultimate horror, is not being poor, right? The ultimate horror is waking up on your 50th birthday and realizing that you've just wasted 25 years of your life chasing a goal that didn't provide you with any level of satisfaction. And if you think that's crazy and unusual, I mean, I can introduce you to dozens and dozens of people that make $500,000 a year and are completely miserable. Other thoughts?
I have a thought. I feel like some of it is also like mindset, like positive mindset as well is linked to it. Because I've met several people that, I mean, they do well for themselves. They don't have like a lot and they're always happy and like they feel like fulfilled and they're taking the time that they do have and they're utilizing it in different ways. So I kind of feel like some of it is also based on like a positive mindset as well. I mean, yeah, obviously money does play into like a certain aspect of it, but I also think that like positivity and like a good mindset and frame is like half the battle with it.
Sure. Yeah, when I talk about an equilibrium level of happiness, that's a very personal thing, right? And, you know, some people have higher levels of, you know, equilibrium levels of happiness. And then, you know, honestly, there are just some miserable sons of bitches in the world that's just their default, is to be miserable, and they enjoy that, and that's who they are, and that's what they wake up and every day they're just, you know, a miserable son of a bitch. That's their equilibrium. So when we talk about happiness, it's important to be very smart about the way our brain works and to be cognizant of the cognitive errors that we run into when we think about happiness for ourselves. And if y'all watch the Daniel Gilbert video, he gives you a little taste of, you know, his research into happiness and the mistakes that we make when we think about our own happiness. This quote, experiences instantly become part of the lens through which we view our entire past, present, and future. And like any lens, they shape and distort what we see. So his whole view of happiness is that, our brains actually work both for us and against us in this human quest for happiness. And our brain does that in 4 different ways. The first is prospection. And one of the things that is unique about human beings in the animal world is that we think about future all the time, right? Our brains are experience simulators, right? It's Friday, so we have plans for the weekend. We think about those plans for the weekend. We think about what that experience is going to be like, and then we reach conclusions regarding how we think we're going to feel after those experiences. And consciously or unconsciously, we do this all the time. If you think about, your own thinking from day to day, we spend an enormous amount of time thinking about the future. And the problem with that is we are really poor judges of what will make us happy in the future. Because when we're thinking about the future, let's just talk about, your weekend plans. Where does that information come from, right? We're going to go out to the lake for the weekend. Where does the information to form that image of what that experience is going to be like come from?
Usually from past experiences.
Yeah, presumably you've been to the lake before, and so you have a memory bank of experiences out at the lake, and you're relying on that memory bank to project what this weekend is going to be like and ultimately how you're going to feel about this weekend. So that's natural, but what's wrong with the memory bank?
We often misremember.
Yeah, in what ways?
I think, the human brain is just programmed to forget the bad and try to remember the good. I just kind of equate that to having babies. I think if women would only have one baby, if they really remembered what childbirth was like, but somehow you forget, you just remember the baby. You don't remember the process of having the baby. Sorry, Diane, I'm not trying to scare you.
What are you doing? You're scaring poor Diane.
She'll forget though. I'm telling you, she will completely forget. That's part of what I'm saying.
Not helpful. Yeah, so I think you're right. One of the things that's true about our memories is it's not like that we're videotaping every second of our life and remembering them in full. Our brains are like a disk drive, and they just don't have the capacity to remember every second of every experience we've had in the past. And so what our brain does is it stores snippets, right? And it tends to store highlights. And so, if you climb to the top of the mountain and you have this amazing mountaintop experience, that's what your brain is going to remember about it. The struggle to the top, right? The fact that your knees hurt, or that you were dehydrated, or that you had to stop every 100 steps to catch your breath. Yeah, we don't tend to put a whole lot of priority on remembering that stuff. We remember the mountaintop moments, and so we misremember, right? We rely on incomplete and inaccurate in total memories to imagine the future. And so misremembering causes us to misimagine. And if we only remember the good stuff and we imagine how amazing this weekend at the lake's going to be, we set ourselves up for disappointment, because we have this memory of all these collective, wonderful highlights from the past that we're trying to recreate. And we tend to ignore the fact that, by the way, it takes an hour and a half to get out there, and it's maybe 100 degrees, or it may rain all day Saturday. It's difficult to capture lightning in a bottle and recreate amazing experiences the same way that we remember them. Y'all have any of these stories of things that you've planned for the future and you've dreamt about and you've thought about and you've worked yourself into a frenzy about how wonderful it's going to be, and then you get there and it doesn't quite live up to your own hype?
I actually had a similar experience, or I had the exact feeling when I was moving to Austin 2 years ago. I was super, super hyped because Austin is the best place on earth. And then I moved here and forgot I had to buy a shower curtain and groceries and make friends and find a grocery store and find a job and all of the things that come with existing. Forgot about that stuff, but was kind of let down when it wasn't as perfect as I thought it would be in my head.
Yeah.
It's better now though.
20 years ago, when we bought a lot out in the hill country to build our house, I swore up and down that every day I was going to go out on the back porch and, watch the sunset and drink wine and look over the Guadalupe River Valley. I haven't done that in a decade, and almost never did it, even after we moved in. That prospective idea never quite lived up in reality.
I think theme parks are like, I always think of, my kids when we were young, they can't wait to go to these theme parks, and you're just like, ugh, they're hot, they're filthy, the lines are long, but they just, can't wait to go. And then you get there and they're crying and they're hot and their feet hurt, and but they really thought it was just going to be the best time ever, and then they end up crying the entire time.
And then
we end
2
up
days later
at
they
them.
want to go again.
Right. And then they're just like, it was so fun. The roller coaster was so great. It's like, do you remember the 3 hours we waited to ride on the roller coaster? Yeah, no, they don't remember that. Yeah. Yeah.
If you think about it, you can all come up with those examples from your own life. My business partner, George, and I went fishing down in Port Aransas one December, and we caught like 8 huge redfish. And we talk about that story as like the best day ever, when, the reality was it was 28 degrees when we got on the boat. I was running 102 temperature. I had a broken wrist and awful diarrhea, and spent the day freezing my ass off, miserable, shivering with fever, trying to cast and reel with a broken wrist. But hey, we caught fish, so must be the best day ever. So think about this prospection, because you're not going to stop thinking about the future, right? That's a human nature thing, that we're not going to stop thinking about the future. What we need to do to ourselves is make sure we don't let our expectations stand in the way of our enjoyment. It's really difficult. I'm going to leave on Saturday of next week to go on vacation, and I'm already trying to rein in my own thoughts about it, you know, about the places we're going to go and the things we're going to do and the amazing experiences we're going to have, and just say, you know, something's going to go really wrong on this trip, and we're going to roll with it. Just trying to manage my own expectations so that I can be in the moment and enjoy the experience as it comes, and not build it up to the point where it doesn't live up to my own hype. The second challenge with our own thinking around happiness comes in the form of presentism. And presentism, I think, is really easy to understand because it affects all of us just about every single day. Presentism is the theory that your current feelings influence your memories and your expectations about the future. Okay, so the way you feel right now, your mood, your attitude, your physical state has an outsized impact on what you think about the future. So any of you that, you know, ever went out to the square on Thursday night and woke up on Friday morning and said, what do you say on Friday morning after the square?
I'm never going to drink again.
I will never, ever drink again. Right? And when you say, I will never drink again with a hangover, you mean it, right? At the time you say it, you absolutely mean it. I never, ever, ever want to do this to myself again. That's presentism, right? That means your present state of mind has a huge influence over how you think about the future. We also see this when we go to the grocery store, right? You go to the grocery store and you're going to buy food for the next week. The amount of food you need for the next week is static, right? I mean, there is an objective quantity of food that you need for the next week. And if you're hungry, you're going to buy more than you need. And if you're full, you're not going to buy enough. I mean, that's how powerful presentism is. It has the ability to make us behave in completely irrational and illogical ways, right? And predicting future events is easy. Predicting future emotions is very difficult. You know, I have taught this particular session of this particular course when I was sick. And it was a real-time example. I mean, I was teaching the class, I was miserable, and I just told the class, I feel so bad right now that I cannot imagine a world in which I feel better. I know I'm going to get better. I mean, this is probably a 24-hour thing. It's completely irrational that I can't conjure up an image of what it feels like to be well and not have this illness. So you can test this for yourself. You know, the next time you have a hangover, or the next time you're sick, or the next time you're full, just try to imagine what it's like to be hungry. So presentism, you know, there's a reason that our parents told us, you know, not to make decisions when we're angry. You just have to recognize, especially in a leadership capacity, that you're a human being and you're going to have emotions and mood swings one way to another. You're going to feel better or worse physically from one day to the next. And you need to be conscious of that and its potential influence on your decision making. And it's perfectly appropriate, and I do this quite frequently, so sometimes it seems like weekly, where I say, if we're having a heated argument or a debate about something and it's an emotionally charged issue, to just say, you know, I don't think this is the best time for us to be having this conversation. How about we pick this up tomorrow? Because the impact of presentism can be so severe. Any thoughts on the notion of how your present state of mind influences your thinking about the future?
Hey, Bill, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
So when I was reading the handouts, and now that we're talking about it, I find myself really struggling with remembering to stay realistic and properly set expectations, and not, you know, just remember the good things or just remember the bad things. But at the same time as well, I'm someone who really struggles with staying positive. So how can I not, you know, let small details impact facts while continuing to manifest positivity?
Well, I think recognizing it is the first step. You know, the phrase that I find myself using both with myself and with others is zoom out. Right? If you ever, you know, think about it from a photography standpoint, you know, if you're taking a picture of something up close, you got lots of detail, lots to see. Every little thing matters. But, you know, if you zoom out and take a picture of that same object from 50 feet away, you have much greater perspective, right? It puts the little details of that object into a much broader perspective and allows you to see that that little thing maybe just isn't that important. And you know, there was a popular series of kind of self-help books a few years back called Don't Sweat the Small Stuff. And the subtitle of that book was, and it's all small stuff. I think that book kind of goes it right at what you're talking about. It's, you can't let the little things stand in the way of your day-to-day contentment, because it's all small stuff. And all we really have to do is widen the aperture and zoom out to recognize that these things that we're worked up about don't really affect the broad arc of our life. That opens up room for you to identify what the big things are that probably warrant your attention and may need to be modified in order to allow you to achieve the things you want to achieve. So I don't think I have a silver bullet, but I think perspective is the key. And if you go back to the conversation we had around the 90-10 principle, you know, if you sit down at a restaurant and they give you a menu and you pick your entree and you're all excited about it, and the waiter comes and says, oh, we're out of that. You know, the world is going to keep spinning. And there's probably something else on the menu that, you know, you will enjoy just as much if you'll allow yourself to. But too many people would let that ruin their entire experience. It's a pretty good example of a small thing.
That's awesome. It sounds like it's all about being emotionally resilient, then, not letting things get to you.
Yeah, resilient and mature about the impact that whatever you're worked up about is really likely to have in the broad arc of your life.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks. I really appreciate that.
I mean, if we zoom out far enough, even really bad things don't have to negatively impact the broad arc of our life. You know, there's tragedy that is objectively bad, but if we zoom out far enough, we can put it in perspective and recognize that we still have other things that we've got going for us. So the third challenge with stumbling on happiness is called impact bias. And impact bias has a very technical definition. It is, we tend to overestimate the hedonic impact of future events. And the word hedonic comes from hedonism, right? Where hedonism is a philosophy that says the purpose of life is to pursue pleasure and to optimize pleasure. So we tend to overestimate the hedonic impact of future events, both good and bad, right? We overestimate how good things are going to make us happy, and we overestimate how bad things are going to negatively impact our happiness. So are you familiar with impact bias in your own life? Can you think of situations where you might have overestimated how something in the future is going to make you feel?
I got an example from yesterday.
Okay.
So I was helping to serve tables at this restaurant, and I don't like it. I don't like to take orders from people and serving the wine and all this stuff. It's really not my thing. But that's my friend, so I went and helped. And I did my whole thing with a feeling that I didn't really like it, but the people there saw that I did a good job. So it made me realize that actually I put too much back on really what I thought, and that I would have a bad time and I would not do a good job or anything. And actually I did pretty well. And then realizing that I did pretty well, now I feel a little bit better. And actually that was not such a big deal.
Yeah. No, great example. I mean, we think about these things that we strive for, right? We at work, we all want to get a promotion. And so we set our eye on the promotion we want, and we set about doing the things we need to do to secure that promotion. And we think about how wonderful it's going to be when we get the promotion. And then we get it. And then what happens?
You want another one?
Yeah, I mean, come on, like, 2 months later, we're the same person we were before the promotion. We realized that thing that we wanted so badly and that we dreamed about for so many months and years just really isn't all that special, right? We overestimated the hedonic impact of that promotion. Tebow's out, chasing the girl of his dreams. He has a picture of her, in his wallet. He sleeps with it under his pillow at night. He's dreaming about her. He finally asks her out and she says yes. And, it's good, but it wasn't like, the amazing experience that he had built it up in his mind.
I think an amazing example of this is weddings.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, just, and I planned them for years for people, and, just the more money they could throw into it, the more that it was going to be what they had dreamed since they were a little girl. And they are never what you imagine them to be. And a lot of people afterwards were like, gosh, I wish I would have put that $40,000 down on a house instead of, and you're like, yeah, you probably would have been a better way to spend that money. But I think that happened. I think it's a good example.
And that's a cheap wedding. Yeah, so I mean, if you watch the video, the one example of the lottery winner, right? And they've done these studies where, you know, they'll go and meet with lottery winners after they win the lottery, and they're elated and they think it's the best thing ever. And, you know, they dreamed of winning the lottery their whole life, and they finally won it, and they're walking on air. And then they go back and they interview them 6 months later, and they find out that, you know, life is pretty much the way it was before. They haven't really fundamentally changed who they are. And so this expectation and overestimation of the impact of future events shows up. You know, I spent my entire adult life kind of dreaming of owning an island, and then I bought one, right? But reality is I overestimated the hedonic impact of that event. It was pretty cool for the first year. I still love it. I still enjoy it. But it hasn't affected who I am as a person. It's a cool thing. I love it. But if you knew me 10 years ago and you knew me today, you probably wouldn't think that particular transaction had fundamentally altered who I am, right? Shakespeare said, things won are done. Things won are done. Joy's soul lies in the doing. So things won are done. You get the girl, you get the promotion, you buy the island, those are done. That's the joy, right, is in the getting there. The fun is the pursuit. Once it's won, it's done. And we find out that the hedonic impact was not quite as great. This works in reverse as well. There are tragedies and negative events that sometimes are just too painful to even imagine. And if we're forced to, we would say, you know, I wouldn't even want to go on living. You know, that would be miserable. And in reality, we're fairly resilient people. When tragedy strikes, you know, short of some clinical, you know, diagnoses, we tend to return to an equilibrium level of happiness in the wake of tragedy. So, you know, the rule is if it happened more than 3 months ago, it probably is not having a big impact on your nature and your equilibrium level of happiness, regardless of how good or bad that event probably was. So enjoy that promotion, right? Enjoy that first date with the guy of your dreams, because 90 days from now, it's probably not going to be offering you much in the way of dopamine squirts. And then the last one is rationalization. So this is the psychological immune system returning you to an equilibrium state, right? And it is essentially a defense mechanism that we use to convince ourselves that we're really smart and that whatever decisions we made must have been the right one. So this is a bit of the subject of the video called Synthetic Happiness, right? And he gives an example of rationalization in the video about a photography class at university. Y'all remember that anecdote from the video? Anybody want to share that one? All right, I'll do it. Pretty easy setup. College level photography class. they break the class into two groups, right? A control group and then a test group. And they say, what we want you to do at the end of the semester is we want you to pick your 2 favorite photographs that you took this semester. And you're going to turn one of them in for a grade. And you get to keep the other one as a memento of, your time in class. And in group A, they say, when you turn in your assignment for a grade, that is an irreversible decision. We're going to take your photographs, we're going to put them in a FedEx package, and we're going to mail them off to headquarters for evaluation. And that decision's final and done. And so the one you decide to keep for yourself is yours. In group B, they say, you can come and turn in your photograph for a grade, but you know what? If you change your mind anytime over the next week, no harm, no foul. Just come back and you can swap out the one you kept with the one you turned in for a grade. You've got options. It doesn't really matter to us which one you choose. So one group has an option to swap it out if they want. The other group, the decision is irreversible. They have no option. And then they go back a couple of weeks later and they ask the subjects, how happy are you with the photograph you kept for yourself? And the people that had no option, right, that once they made that decision and the one they kept was the only one they could, were significantly more happy with their decision than the people that had the choice of swapping it out with the one they submitted for a grade. So this is rationalization in action, right? The people that had an irreversible decision said, I obviously made the best choice because the decision is irreversible. The people that had the choice of swapping it out spent the entire 2 weeks agonizing over whether they made the right choice or not, and ultimately were less happy with what they decided to keep. So if you think about that, and then you go back at the beginning of the semester and you gave students a choice, which group would you rather be in? Would you rather be in the group that you have to make a final decision and you don't get to reverse it? Or would you rather be in the group where you have options and flexibility? Which group would most people choose?
I feel like most people would choose the group that you get to have the option.
Yeah, of course. We love options. Why wouldn't we want options? Right?
Because you don't feel trapped.
Exactly. The problem is that we are consciously deciding to choose to be in the group that will make us less happy. Right? Choice is the enemy of synthetic happiness. Because when you remove choice, rationalization kicks in and we determine that we obviously made the best choice and we're happy. Right? This is the difference between dating and marriage, right? When you're dating, you kind of are critically evaluating all of someone's kind of small flaws. And once you decide to marry them, those small flaws become endearing qualities. Because you've made a final decision and now it's your brain's responsibility to rationalize that decision to make sure that it can convince you that you made the right one. So the question of synthetic happiness is it as good as real happiness? And the answer is, who cares? Right? I mean, synthetic happiness versus real happiness is all happiness. So just because an objective third party might scratch their head and say, why are they so happy? You know, that it flies in the face of logic based on their circumstances. It doesn't matter to the person experiencing the happiness whether other people agree with them or not. They're still happy. We're very good at lying to ourselves about these things. And lying to ourselves is not always a bad thing if it puts us in a better place. Okay, last topic on rationalization and happiness is we need to be conscious of the super replicating beliefs, right? They're stories that we tell ourselves about happiness that really have no basis in fact. And the super replicating beliefs tend to perpetuate themselves because when one generation falls victim to a super replicating belief, they rationalize happiness and then they pass that super replicating belief on to the next generation. So this shows up in the question of marital happiness and the impact that children have on marital happiness. So if I, called your mother and said, what is the single greatest source of joy in your life? What answer is she required to give me?
For children.
Yeah, I mean, you can't say my boat is the single greatest source of joy in my life. I mean, you'd be ostracized from society. There is only one acceptable answer to that question, right? And that's my children. And while that may actually be true at the individual level, right? Like, your source of happiness may come from your children. However, if you ask the question about the marital level and say, how much happiness is there in the marital relationship? Several longitudinal studies have proven that teenagers are the worst thing you can do for that relationship, right? If you look at this chart, which is just a bad reproduction from a graph in the book, these couples start out married without children at very high levels of marital happiness. And then you see this kind of slow decline. Maybe, you get into having children and toddlers, and we find out that this is really hard work. And then it bounces up a little bit, when they go to school finally, and then the alien body snatchers come and inhabit, your teenage children's bodies and creates tremendous stress on the relationship, right? The worst thing for a marriage is a 16-year-old girl. Right? I mean, if a marriage can survive a 16-year-old girl, you're actually in pretty good shape. Because if you look at the curve on the right-hand side, once you get the kids out of the house, things start to get a little better. Now, in some cases, they don't ever actually go back up to as good as they were when you were married without children, but they get a lot better. So this is what's known as a super replicating belief. And the idea is to just be aware of those super replicating beliefs and make sure that you're being really smart and conscious about your own decisions that you make. So we're all striving for happiness. Most of us don't really know how. My hope for you is that you'll continue to strive, but you'll strive with a real purpose and a clear-eyed view of what you're looking to achieve. I think that when it comes to comparison, the tendency to compare ourselves to people that we consider in better positions is not helpful, right? That always leaves us wanting. That always leaves us a little bit short of where we want to be. I think a much more healthy set of comparisons is comparing yourselves to your goals. Like, how am I doing? Am I making progress? Comparing yourself to your values, right? Without regard to how much progress I may be making in my bid to be happy, am I living a life that is consistent with my values? Am I behaving in a manner that is consistent with what I say is important? And thirdly, compare yourself to where you were. You know, whenever I encounter someone in my life that doesn't feel that they're making enough progress, they're not satisfied with where they are, it's generally pretty easy to get them to compare themselves to a younger version of themselves. You say you're unsatisfied with your performance. Let me tell you how much better you are now than you were 2 years ago. And by the way, if you keep up with that development trajectory, you'll be setting the world on fire 2 years from now. So compare yourself to your goals, compare yourself to your values, compare yourself to where you were, and recognize how far you've come. One of my favorite quotes, I have a little plaque on my desk that's from Lord Acton. To be able to look back on one's life with satisfaction is to have lived twice. So as in our bid for happiness, what we're really after is being able to look back on the sum of our experiences and to think that we did it right and that we have something that provided us with satisfaction and fulfillment. Thank y'all again for spending some time over the course of the last month or so with us. I hope this little window into the world of the curriculum that we teach in the Housley Principal Leadership Program will interest you enough that you want to come and either sit through the entire program, or for those of you who have already done that, to drop in and participate as much as you'd like. We always love it when people come back and share their experiences with our current students. So thanks again for everything. I think Melinda might have had to drop off, but I assume that the Rose or Melinda are going to send around a survey for you to take.
Yes, I will be emailing everyone a survey and a little certificate just saying that you completed the class, and you can add it to your LinkedIn, whatever you'd like.
And just a reminder here is my contact information. I'm pretty easy to find one way or another, so feel free to screenshot that or jot down that if we're not already connected. I would certainly welcome staying connected and happy to do anything that I can for each of you at any point in the future.
Thank you.
Have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.